code, but we're still figuring out how to airplay and get presentations going. So yeah, I'm kicking us off. My name is Pejman, Pour-Moezzi. I'm a co-founder at Magoosh, which is an education startup, and I've been vibe coding for, I'd say, like maybe 30, 40 hours over the last few weeks, and I figured that was enough to qualify me to present today. But in seriousness, I have picked up quite a few things in kind of just these few hours of vibe coding, so I figured I'd just go through them today. So first, just wanted to talk a little bit about my background, as I think that's really important. There's a lot of kind of things, a lot of different skill levels people bring to vibe coding. I wouldn't consider myself an engineer. I've been kind of full-time coding in a decade plus. Like when I was doing a lot of coding, it was in this era. Ruby on Rails was all the rage. You had used Bootstrap for your CSS, and jQuery, JavaScript. This was like pre-React. I was using Heroku for deployment. So like the things I'm doing now with Cursor, I would definitely consider vibe coding because I don't know a lot of the stuff that I'm actually doing full off. But at the same time, I'm not like a complete beginner to coding. Like I know, how to set up my local environment and do source versioning and deployment and all these sort of things. And I think that's just important context that I think there's a lot of things around development beyond just the code itself to be productive. And so I like to think I'm kind of in the sweet spot because I have to play the ignorance a bit, and I know enough to kind of get going. I put this slide in mostly to just point out one thing. This is the tweet that kicked off the term vibe coding, and it was from February 2nd, so it's only 5 weeks old as a concept. So just wild to think about. And a lot has happened in that time. Claude put out 3.7 as a model. Cursor's leaned a lot more into its agent mode, and just a lot of things happening in the space. So it is rapidly developing. So in terms of kind of just resources, things that I've been using to learn, there's a lot on Twitter. This is one person here, McKay Wrigley, that I do follow. A lot of his tutorials, I've subscribed to his courses, and found him pretty helpful in terms of just learning the basics of Cursor, as well as just prompting and different workflows to use. So you'll see his stuff throughout this as I go. And there's a lot more good resources on Twitter. The stuff I'm personal projects that I'm building, I usually use this starter template, and I do find it helpful to use a starter template. Not only is it just kind of full stack and makes it quick to go if you're not very opinionated on exactly what tools you want to use, but it comes with Cursor rules built for this specific stack, so it's just kind of ready to go and you can be productive very quickly. And this is it's a public repo, so you can get that template there. So I'm going to go into very specific kind of workflows, but first I just wanted to share a little bit of kind of the mental model I've built around vibe coding and kind of this credo I have of like skinny prompts, fat specs. So let me explain kind of what that means. I think vibe coding, when it's like working the way we picture it or the meme shows, is like you're just firing off your voice transcriber, saying a simple sentence, and then the code just grows and it's there, and then it's all working. And at least for me, when I first started using Cursor, that's basically how I started. Did that, it worked reasonably well. And then I just kept using just different prompts in the composer, and just that was how I would work. And eventually I was seeing that was kind of falling over as the code complexity grew and kind of the specific things I needed it to do. I was getting more opinionated on what needed to happen. So what I found is in order to make that work, you need fat specs. And there's 3 different things I mean when I say that. There's project rules, there's feature specs, and then there's just tests and ways to verify that what you built is working the way you intended and past things don't break. I'm just gonna talk about rules and specs, but I think there's a lot on the testing side as well. So going into rules, first just pointing out rules is a feature in Cursor. It's not just like a generic term when I'm saying rules. This is the settings in Cursor. And there's two types of rules. There's user rules, which are on every single request you make in the chat, Composer, wherever. And then there's project rules. The user rules, frankly, I'm not even sure if this is helping me. I got this from somewhere, and I stuck it in, and maybe it helps. I don't know. The project rules is where I think there's a lot of value, and I'm using heavily. These are mostly the ones I got from the template, but I've made changes. But I just want to show you kind of one in particular. So here's like the backend rule for my project. And with a rule, you say kind of when it should run. So the agent will use this rule whenever working on the backend. So that's kind of when it runs this rule on any request. And this rule for the backend includes things like what I'm using on the backend, how I like kind of where I want files created, what the name format should be, if we're creating a schema, what the schema should look like. So it's all these like very specific ways of how I want my backend to work, and it's all contained in this rule file, and Cursor knows when to go leverage that rule based on kind of these configurations at the top. And I think rules are very cool because they're very easy to write. So like I added this rule, for example, a logging rule just to have kind of a log of the major changes with bullet points. So pretty simple to craft. It's all just, English, just simple language. And then I kick this one off manually. So whenever I say log changes, it executes this and adds to this cursor log markdown. A rule that I found very helpful, funny enough, is a rule for creating rules. This basically describes where you store the rule, again, the naming, kind of the things to have in a rule. And I've used this already a few times in just the few days that I've had it. So for example, something really annoying for me that Claude does is it tries to run development all the time, even though I'm already running development. So I added a rule, and I said, like, don't do this anymore. Create a rule to not run development. I'm already running it. Don't, like, assume I'm always running it. And it crafted the whole rule, and now it doesn't bother me about that anymore. So pretty powerful format I found, and a useful one. So going to specs, this is what I mean when it comes to a spec. So whenever I'm working on obviously when I'm kicking off a new project, but also working on like a major new feature, I go through this process. And there's really 3 parts that go into it. So I'll just go through each one, and each kind of cascades into the next. The prompts I'll show you are all available here and are also just publicly available. So first step is the feature request. So here I basically take my one-line kind of idea of what the feature should be. And this prompt specifically is a back and forth with the LLM to just flesh it out more. So we talk through like, what are the sub features, who's the intended audience, kind of what are some considerations around it. So there's specific things I'm asking the LLM to work with me on with it. And it's just multiple turns of going through this. So I usually use something like GPT 4.5. You want it to be somewhat fast, you want it to be creative, and you're outputting it into just simple markdown that you then take into the next step. So next step would be the tech spec. So here you're feeding in the feature request, the cursor rules, and any of the code you currently have. And you're asking for basically an architecture of how the feature should be implemented. So like the components, the database, schema, any docs and libraries you want referenced in it. So I think there's two paths. The way that I've seen it taught is like use O1 Pro with repo prompt. It's a little bit more involved, but you get kind of, the most powerful LLM. I honestly often just take the feature request, put it into Markdown in Cursor, and then just work directly in Cursor itself because it already has all those things right there. And I just have it edit the Markdown and put it below the feature request. And I find that works very quickly and fast. And then the final bit is the implementation plan. So here you're just trying to sequence out what are all the kind of logical steps for implementing this feature and doing it step by step in small increments. So again, you input all the stuff you had below or before. You have this kind of markdown checklist format so that the LLM kind of has context of where it is on the steps and can see kind of the past steps it's already completed. And again, I still just use Claude inside Cursor to create it and then add it to the markdown file. So then when I'm done, I have this big markdown file with all three pieces. And once you have that, you have a much quicker chat format with Composer. You don't have to reference all the things, right? You have all the rules there. You have all the specs. So I add that as context. And you could essentially be like, let's continue off where we left off and mark it complete. I'm hand waving over this a little bit. It does honestly go off the rails sometimes. Like sometimes it'll just go through all 10 steps at once. So you do have to be like very explicit at times to be like, just do this step, don't do anything else. But it's much faster than trying to come up with all that context and do that in a prompt fresh. So that's my, hopefully within 20-minute kind of view into using at least rules and specs to make you more productive with vibe coding.
So you still have 10 minutes. We could do Q&A, actually. That might be helpful. Or you can just kind of recap the points.
Yeah? Yeah, anyone curious about any parts of that? Yeah.
I have a question. Something I've been curious about with structuring and organizing rules better. When we add other rules, does that, because I kind of want to create like a directory, an index of rules, for this stuff here, this stuff there. But I don't want it to inline all those rules and just have this like recursive, yeah. So do you know what the behavior is with that?
You're saying like a rule that references another rule, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't gone too deep into it. Frankly, I'll just share kind of what you're saying, where I don't feel like I have enough sense of when the rules are executing or not. So I think that's one of the things that Cursor could do better, is helping me see how it's working. But mine are distinct rules right now. I don't have like a hierarchy, I would say. Yeah.
For context, how big and old is your code base? Are you building new?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because so Magoosh is a 15-year-old company. We have a massive code base, and I'm not the main engineers working in that code base. So I'm building some internal tools for Magoosh, and I purposely decided to just build brand new code base and then just have a database connection. So connected to our database, and now I'm just building from scratch. And I think of it almost like a retool, like an AI LLM-driven retool. And that's made me very productive. And our own engineers don't go as far as I am because there's just so much context and rules. So I find just spinning up a new app works well.
Have you compared Cloud Code yet?
Sorry?
Have you tried Cloud Code?
I have not tried Cloud Code, so yeah, curious about that.
In my experience with Cloud Code, you also give it, I was like, yesterday, I was like, do the header and the footer.
Yeah.
Don't do anything else.
Yeah.
And it spit out a 4-page app. Like, this is pretty good, actually. You were like, let's do the rest of the steps. Let's work from this. This is good.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah.
So you mostly talked about, I guess, setup there. What's the actual process of going through the steps? You mentioned the testing. What does debugging look like in the process?
In terms of like once I have the markdown file created, so I put in the markdown file. and basically say, look through this file fully. I always say that. And then I say, tell me what step we're on. Don't start yet. It repeats out kind of what the step is, what its plan is, and then execute it. Then I'm manually testing it. Usually I just add tests at the end. And yeah, that's roughly as far as I go right now. I manually mark X each step. So I guess you could technically automate that part, but I manually do that part. I'll log the changes sometimes as well, but that's generally my workflow, is just going step by step.
What about the debugging process?
Debugging is very manual for me right now. I'm trying out this MCP browser tools, but I haven't got it fully working yet, to be honest. But yeah, I'm manually in the browser, taking screenshots, putting them in, do a lot of logging, server side in the console, in the browser, copying and pasting those things into Cursor. So that part's very manual for me still, but it works reasonably well. The more you can do kind of in Composer, the better. Like terminal, you could do in Composer and all these things, and it'll troubleshoot itself. Yeah.
Are you checking your prompts into your repo, or are they just kind of like one-time throwing?
Those are, like the ones that I linked to at the bottom, I'll go grab those. But then otherwise, I'm mostly just coming up with my prompts as I go. The markdown file I save in my repo. So I have a docs folder, and all my features have like that markdown file with all those 3 sections I talked about.
Does that change log ever diverge from the actual state of the repo?
Yeah, it does, because like right now I have it run manually. So like I'll forget to do it at times, and then it's missing those. I do find like if I commit more, it's better, because the history I find really important. Sometimes I'm troubleshooting a bug, I can't find it can't fix it, but if I could pinpoint exactly which commit the bug was introduced in, then it'll actually do a better job at solving the problem. So I feel like some history or commits, however you're capturing your history, is really important for the debugging process.
Okay, we'll do one more question. Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's for some reason. All right, Kevin, or make sure that we get this mic. Yeah, this is weird. Yeah, it was working. All right, just grab that first. And then maybe the second one.
Do I need to restart?
No. It's all good. 1, 2. 1, 2. Just need to talk louder.
Oh.
Can you close it? Somewhere here. Yeah. You can just keep it here. Is that good? Yeah. All right. Oh. There we go. Sneak preview. Okay. So, hi everybody. I'm Kevin. I'm a principal engineer at Pioneer Square Labs, and I kind of accidentally became a YouTuber the other day, which was basically, I've been doing AI coding for a long time. About 1.5 years ago, I started working on my own AI coding open source project, and have been just naturally curious about this and doing things, and been building things really quickly lately. And I shared a video of my workflow with one of my colleagues one day, and he was like, oh, this is cool. And I was like, oh, this is what we do every day. It didn't feel weird to me. And then I went, and there was like some Reddit forum, and I posted it there, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Like, this is mad. Like, this is crazy. And I'm like, oh, people find this interesting? Okay. So I started doing a couple more videos, and like, for some reason, people seem to like watching me write code, which just feels very weird to me. But as a result, I have like a bunch of hours of very, very boring videos. So I thought, I'm gonna just like condense this down into like 20 minutes of like the most important things you actually need to know when you're doing this. And we're gonna try doing this live. It's probably gonna be a horrible disaster, but let me start off with tip number 1, which is, and I think actually there's a lot of similarities between our talks, a lot of shared things here, but I think it's super important to use an AI-friendly stack, right? Very jagged edge in terms of like how fast and how well you can code with AI. I tend to be kind of more towards the bleeding edge, just given my job and everything I've been doing. But what I consider AI-friendly is like using typed languages, like TypeScript's really good, popular frameworks, and popular versions. Like for instance, Tailwind's 4.0 came out the other day. I did not upgrade because I just figured like the LLM has no idea how to do this, so I'm just like on the standard one. And same thing, like using kind of verbose languages, like Python's really good with this. Tailwind, so you're not kind of going back and forth between your styles and your components, things like that. And if you guys want, I have this next AI starter I just threw together. So this is a very opinionated, very heavy batteries included starter. And for ours, I'm just going to go ahead and I already started this because it takes a sec. But basically, I just cloned this here, and then I changed the name and did an install. So we're going to start working from here in just a sec. All right. So tip 2 is I always start outside my IDE. And I want to use the smartest model possible to go through and generate a lot of those specs and a lot of those docs. And so basically, similar workflow where I use speech to text, and I just chat and chat until I get a really good outline of what I want to do. This can be the start of a new app. It can be a new feature. I also will record pretty much any meeting I have with like a business lead, and I just take that transcript and use that. So that's another good tip. And then it's all about just getting as much context and having that model think as much as possible to try to fill in as many gaps as possible by the time you get down to your checklist of things to do, okay? And so just to give an example of that, and this is a semi-real world thing. So I've got a video series now where I'm actually building out like an AI coding agent from like first principles, so you can kind of see how these things work behind the scenes. And this is all just like me, speech to text, just talking, a bunch of stuff, right? And then basically what I did is I have a series of prompts here. And what's interesting about these prompts is basically I had it go through and come up with a bunch of like BRD best practices and a bunch of these like, things that PMs do. I don't know what any of this stuff is, honestly. But the key is I just want that thinking model to think and think and think as much as possible before it gives me the output. I just find you get a little bit higher quality there. So basically all I did is I took this and I took this and I just copy and pasted it into this. And this is a thinking model, so this takes a while to, this is my thing that I copied. So I just pasted it here, boom, 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 and I hit go, and then you get like this little BRD. I don't read this. The whole point of this is you want to keep going and going and going until you get this checklist. Now, the checklist I actually do read, and I actually care about that being right. But you can see here, it's just like doing a bunch of stuff. Like I'm sure some PM is like really excited about this, but yeah. So scroll. The whole point here is I want to get to the bottom, and I want to get a checklist of, where do I say it? 1 story point stories. And I actually find that's really a key kind of magic phrase because you kind of want to be in that sweet spot of about 25 back and forth messages. If you just do one at a time, you're constantly having to copy paste and do a bunch of work. If you do too much, it goes off the rails. So I find that's actually a pretty good way to do it. All right, so we generated this checklist, and I just copy this and mark down. And then let's do this. We're going to open this up. Okay. See what happens. All right, so here's my starter template. And one of the things I have here is this cursor tasks file, okay? Let's go ahead and paste this in, and we'll save this. You can see here, this is a checklist of all of the things I want to do. I'll go into a little bit more detail of exactly what this looks like in a sec here, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to kick this off and have this work in the background as I go back to my presentation, and we will kind of keep an eye on this as we go. All right, so I'm using 3.7. I'll go ahead and use thinking here. And, well, try again. Oh, boy. Let's try one more time. Oh, there it goes. Okay. There it goes. Okay, it's doing stuff, hopefully. Okay, so that's tip 2. Yeah, and if you go here, I've got all of these, all those templates and all that. Seems to work pretty well, so I'd give it a shot. That's kind of my magic word. As we just saw here, creating that markdown file. And basically that little prompt that I used was just, hey, go through one story. So one story has a couple of tasks in it, and just do that one story. And when you're done, do a build. And then when you're done, check everything off, okay? Just go through. I've got an example of one of those here if you want to check it out. But that's kind of basic standard stuff at this point. So one thing I've been doing lately is starting with something called Storybook. You guys, anybody familiar with Storybook? It's sort of like a front-end tool to kind of help you. I tend to use it as sort of a visual testing type of tool. So really easy to be able to check a bunch of different states. You can get a button that has different colors and disabled and all that sort of thing. And the one little addition that I did to my checklist there for this project was I told it I only want to do the front end for this. This is a brand new project. And I want you to create storybook stories for each of these components. And I want you to break it down in this atomic design structure format. So basically you start with components, and then you build those components into little sections, and then those sections into pages. So you kind of go step by step into that. Now, some of the reasons for doing this, I find if you don't do this, sometimes Cursor will be like, oh, hey, I've got this section over here, and there's a dashboard, and then I copy that code over here, and you've got like 10 different copies that are slightly different all over the place, instead of using your actual components. So I find that just kind of having this in that checklist helps. It's also really good for self-documenting that code. So you do the whole front end first, and then you can say, hey, create the API, create the data layer, and it's really good about following and understanding that in a nice way. On that same page, it's much easier to iterate. So if you do the full stack and then you show it to somebody and you're changing stuff around, now you got to do a database migration, you got to change the API. It gets confused between all these files. And so if you can just go through and just kind of create this clickable prototype, you share it with the business stakeholders, you play around with it, move stuff around, get all the components moved, and then you're like, all right, this is good. It's actually really quite good at doing that full stack once you have that thing done. And also, it's just you get this for free, basically, right? I love Storybook, but I always find it a hassle, and you got to keep the thing updated, and it takes a long time to do all these stories, and it's a pain to install. You get that stuff for free with the AI, so it's a nice addition. All right, so I'm sure I've got a thing I've got to click over here. Oh, it's doing it. Okay, no, it's still working. Great. Okay, so basically what it did is it went through. This is thinking. It is not stopping. It's just going, which is fine for now. But yeah, so basically it's committing changes and all this stuff. So we've created some stories here. Let me see here. Okay, so now it's saying go on to story 2. So at this point, basically I just go up, I copy this. And let's just keep going here. Okay, we're gonna go. I have no idea where this building, but yeah, we'll check it out at the end here. All right, so this is a little Easter egg I hid into one of my videos. Something we discovered at PSL about 6 weeks ago. I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this, but I'm happy to share it with you guys. Is using these rubrics with thinking models has been a really good unlock for us. So, we found that thinking models are great with coding, math, logic, but when we were using it with sort of standard, just asking questions about design, about other things, it was kind of mediocre. But what we did is we basically had this rubric that we had been using at PSL for coming up with good company ideas. And so we basically took this rubric, we fed it into the LLM, and we said, hey, come up with some ideas. The ideas were way higher quality than what we had before. And I thought, hey, this is kind of cool. So I started using this rubric with a bunch of different things. And the way it works is pretty simple. I just go and I think of a category of something I want to do. And I just say, hey, create a rubric with 5 to 7 categories. Have A through F descriptions. So here's an example of one of these. This is a markdown file, right? So this is a UX design rubric. So, basically here's the best case for each of these sections. Here's kind of worst case. And I basically say, hey, keep thinking about this problem until you have an A across every single one of these categories. Again, it's just about making that model think and think and think as much as possible before you actually get that output. And so I've got a few of these that I just stick in I have a docs folder in my Cursor, right? And I can just reference these at certain points. And so I say, hey, I want to get UX, check out this rubric, get an A category across the board, update the UX, and tends to work pretty well. This one I'll go fast. We already saw this a little bit, but especially as you get more files and you're not starting from scratch, you need to reference a lot of stuff. And so using something like RepoMix, the other day I vibe coded an open source version of this that works on Windows and a little bit simpler and doesn't cost $200. So you can try that if you want. But I use this all the time. I think it's really helpful. I tend to just kind of go back and forth between the smartest models. You're starting to see this where O1 Pro isn't available in the API. So I use deep research. If you use deep research and have it not research, you actually get a super smart model there. So that's another tip. All right, we've gone through some of these before. Let me show you just real quick here. As it's been going on, let me see if I need to hit go. Oh, it's still going. OK, we'll see what it built. Yeah, there it goes. So basically, I have a rule in here that basically says, hey, when you're done doing something, just make an update, right? It's just nice to kind of have a little reference of all these things here. OK, let me just go last tip here, cursor updates. Oh, for design, Sonnet's actually quite good at design. This is my shorthand. Hey, this sucks. Make it pop. Make it look better. Actually works. You might have to do 3-4 times. Maybe mention that rubric, something like that. I find it's pretty decent at getting a good design. And then debugging, this is a good tip. This wasn't mine, but I've used this and it's quite good, which is don't write code. Come up with 5 to 7 different ideas of why this may not be working and pick the best. Again, get that model to think, get a bunch of context, and then it'll give you better answers. All right, so I'm very curious to see how this works. Let's go ahead and kick off our storybook, and let's just see what happened here. OK. So remember, what we're trying to do is have this. Hey, then look at this. So we got this atomic design. So here's an example of storybook. Here's a button. You got all these different things here. We've got these smaller things, atoms, right? So we've got this, just a simple button here. Here's your input text. You can see it with a bunch of different things, the error state. That's cool. I haven't seen this, right, guys? Looking at this, same as you guys. So these are all just kind of the simple pieces here. Then we're going to start to pull this together into something that, well, that didn't work. That's a modal, so yeah, we'll see if that works. You can start to see, hey, this is what a form looks like, right? See what this looks like. And then, in theory, you start to go up the stack and you start to see, oh, this is kind of cool. You start to see it actually start to put your pieces together and get all this stuff. And you can see because we have all this data here with the name and the phone, it's much better at creating that back end behind the scenes. And then, from here again, you can kind of iterate on design. You can start to do different things. So, yeah. So, again, this will just keep going. I'll start to build out my app, and then I can play with it. So, all right, that's it. All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, do we have time for questions? Yeah.
Just for the rubrics, is that made by humans or?
I mean, we started with one that was made by humans, but it takes a long time to make one of those rubrics, and the LLMs are actually quite good at it. So yeah, I just asked for a rubric. It's pretty straightforward, 5 to 7 categories, A through F. It gives you a pretty good one.
And you guys have tried it for, I've seen the UX one, but
Yep.
you can also do it for ideation.
Ideation, I've used it for a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, it's kind of a good trick. Yeah. Yeah.
I noticed you use this storybook for forums. Do you actually put full-fledged pages there eventually, or is the goal to build a whole experience outside of the individual pages in a web framework and build them as components and have pretty much the whole app in storybook?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. It should keep going, and then sometimes it doesn't get the final page that connects all the other pages. I might just throw that together quickly, in Next. But yeah, I like to have all that. Yeah.
So we've tried techniques like this before, and the problem
Yeah.
we run into, and I wonder how you overcome this, is that we get a pretty good prototype working, and it works within a week.
Yeah.
Where you build a really complex app really, really fast.
Yeah.
But then, if you want to do anything with that app later and modify it in some way,
Yeah.
it effectively becomes impossible. And because the architecture it chose is just wrong in some way,
Uh-huh.
or it just made some design decisions that
Yeah.
you wouldn't have made as a
Yep.
engineer.
Yep. So
How long has one of your projects lasted in terms of like actually been iterated on after you did this?
yeah. Well, I would say, so I've got my Jacob open source code base. I've been basically vibe coding that using Jacob Eck. That's quite big and complex. And I found that, it's not good at refactoring, but it's actually quite good at like adding new things. The two tips I would give for that is for a code base, like I've got another app that I've been building out, which is my kind of internal thing at PSL, where we kind of, so this is fairly, I don't know how many lines of code here, but we've got all of our people, we've got a bunch of ideas, we can create new ideas, we can like drill in and see a bunch of details, competitive analysis, and a bunch of stuff here. The way I keep this up to date is I will work for about a week, and then I do that code base in there, and I say, hey, find any issues with this. I want to refactor this. And I'll spend like 2 or 3 hours refactoring and just get suggestions of like, all right, what should I be moving around? Do you see any big errors here? Do you see any holes? And I find that actually works pretty well. The other thing is just to use a stack that I'm really familiar with and I use, and then my cursor rules are very specific. I spent hours making sure that these are like exactly how I like to write code. And then I try to keep things, architecturally about like I like to do things. But having that kind of check-in of like a refactor every week or so is pretty helpful for keeping it up to date. Yeah.
Suppose I'm the hiring manager for engineering at a large company.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, vibe coding is the future. How
Yeah.
does this change the profile of the engineer I'm recruiting for
Yeah.
than what I'm used to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it will lean a little bit more towards, first of all, people who are enthusiastic and leaning into AI. There's definitely a lot of developers that are pushing back against it, don't believe that it's interesting. So I would say look for that. Ask about what they've done recently in AI they think is interesting. That's a good sample. I think also kind of going towards generalists who might have like good taste in design, can kind of think through a product spec, can also write code. Like I think those are going to be the types of engineers, like smaller teams of those as opposed to more specialists will be how teams are built in the future, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think right now it's just enthusiasm more than anything, because that's been the big either or. So like everybody's in this room here versus the people who are looking at stuff like this and being like, oh, it's crypto, this is like the next thing, this is a bunch of hype. Like if you do things the right way and if you're on that bleeding edge, I think this is good proof that you can move really quickly. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but it's going to expand over time. And like now is a good time to start learning this because it's just going to keep getting better. So.
All right, one more question.
Go back.
Have you tried using, I haven't done this, but like, have you tried using Gemini for a large code bases to create either a bunch of cursor rules or rubrics for the refactoring part? I'm gonna guess.
Yeah.
That's the news because like, live coding takes off, so everybody makes code bases, they're so small.
Yep.
Now, 2 months in, so they're big, so everyone's gonna run into that issue. So
Yeah.
how would you solve it?
Yeah, so 2 things. One is absolutely, when I made my cursor rules, I started in Gemini, took the entire code base, one of mine, and I said, give me some rules, and I just like really spent time tweaking it. For Jacob, I mean, one thing with Jacob, my AI coding agent I built was, it was meant for large code bases. And so what we did was we indexed the code, basically every file, and we run it through like a light LLM and basically say, just give me a description of this, give me some of the, we do tree sitter, we get like a basic overview of what each of these files are, and we would send that whole overview to Gemini and say, hey, of these files, give me the 50 most relevant ones. And then we pull out the actual 50 files, send that back to Gemini and say, okay, Gemini, give me a plan based on these files and go do a thing. And so that's how I automated it. You could do it manually, it'd just be kind of a hassle, but using that huge context window with Gemini, especially now the 2 million is like, that's really quite interesting. So.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
So good.
Get out of
So
here.
much for sharing. That
Yeah,
was
no
great.
worries.
I get the 20 minutes?
Okay, wait, that too? Okay, there we go.
And then do you have the lab mic, or do you take? I got it.
Art took Is that close enough proximity? Well, hey everybody. I'll connect here real fast. Tyler, you said presentation? Yeah. Okay. All right, sweet. So I added a QR code here. I've also got this at the end of the slides, just in case you want to take a photo. I've got a lot of links to different resources, so it might be helpful, but no pressure. So hey everybody, I'm Patrick Ellis. I am the CTO at Snapbar. And just to give a little bit of context, we're a early stage team. We're about 8 people, 13-ish if you include contractors. And we're really trying to go for the highly leveraged, using Gen AI throughout the entire company meme that I'm sure everybody's seen online. So there's a lot of applied learnings that I thought could be pretty interesting to share. Also some overlap with the other 2 presenters. They did an excellent job, so I'll try to kind of de-emphasize those pieces. But I think the more kind of principles and applied lessons will be helpful to you guys. And then, yeah, just a quick background. I've spent time in SF in Seattle over the last 10 years as a full stack engineer, and then been really diving deep the last, I would say, year and a half to a year on the code gen side, and then kind of the last almost 2 years on the, we've had a Gen AI-based product in production, mostly on the multimodal side, so Stable Diffusion, Flux, that toolkit. And then, of course, a lot of reasoning now as well. So I've been trying to go as deep as I can. I was just at the AI Engineer Summit in New York a couple of weeks ago, and that was super helpful. A lot of lessons and learnings from other attendees. Also would highly recommend that. They've got this summit, I'll mention, and I'm not affiliated at all, but coming up in June down in San Francisco, and it was really, really valuable last year. Just like 2,000 fellow builders to talk to, which was really fun. All right, I heard this on a podcast driving over here. Pretty wild. Prompt engineering, vibe coding, I mean, kind of projected to be roughly at the same level on Google Trends. So just to give some context to the moment we're in. Okay, so where has vibe coding really helped? Also, Tyler, if you could give me like a 5-minute warning. Okay, thanks. I'll try to get through as much as I can. I kind of threw this together late last night, so I haven't timed it out or anything. Okay, so the first area is more of what I would actually consider vibe coding for us. So for our workflow, that tends to include using bolt.new or lovable.dev. I'm sure most of you, actually, who is familiar with Bolt or Lovable? Okay, yeah, so basically everybody. So of course, kind of a 0 to 1 or greenfield, new code-based development, and then eventually taking that over with Cursor or Windsurf, or I've actually been using Claude Code the most as of late. I feel like it's been the most competent for our use cases. So what's been really interesting with that is empowering the non-technical folks. So even our product folks, but our sales, even our CEO, being able to allow them to prototype and explore ideas, and then taking that over on the engineering side. Sometimes that means actually, like with a more ephemeral, less durable, or kind of something that we're going to maintain long term, something that's like a gallery or a slideshow in our context, can be excellent to use that workflow for, where we build it with Cursor or Lovable, and then get it to integrate with our backend and everything using Cursor or Windsurf. For anything more complex, of course, that doesn't necessarily work, but what is really valuable is using Bolt.new and Lovable to essentially communicate effectively from the non-technical folks to engineering what the requirements are. So you can think of it as like Figma plus a bunch of requirements, documentations, and then actual feedback with an engineer. So instead of me working with our CPO, for example, he can go and just kind of iterate with essentially an engineer, Bolt or Lovable, to kind of get a sense of what capabilities are there. I mean, especially for somebody non-technical, that's been a huge, huge help for a lot of basic stuff that an engineer would help with. So being able to define the ideas more concretely, and then either fully transfer those over, or even using one of the models, so Claude or whatever, to describe in great detail the requirements from that new code base into like a markdown doc, which we can then use as a starter to apply a more disciplined engineering process using Claude Code, for example, in order to build that up to an actual production application. So that idea of using these models to create the code and then describe it, which is like a lower fidelity way to represent all the features and ideas, and then to rebuild that using, again, a more disciplined workflow has been really, really valuable. So yeah, the non-engineering and engineering requirements and capabilities communication, as I just described, honestly, it's been this workflow using Bolt and Lovable has been able to replace Figma for a lot of our apps. And again, keep in mind, we're earlier stage, so there's a lot of new development and new features that are actually a really, really good fit for this workflow. Of course, Figma is still important for more mature versions of our products. And then getting partner feedback, customer dev, being able to like spin something up and show a salesperson, and then the development speed up. So yes, a slideshow. We went from Bolt to Cursor, and that is entering production this week. That was almost entirely vibe coded. Obviously, I've reviewed the PRs and made sure that we're not doing anything crazy. But it's a very simple code base. And then something more complicated like a new dashboard that we're building right now. That is something where the second approach I mentioned, where we're exploring ideas, has been much more helpful. So that's the first step, is kind of the vibe coding side. Another piece that has been really valuable to us has been augmenting our traditional development workflows using Claude. So I just described this quite a bit. I think the difference here, though, in the more kind of disciplined approach, as I mentioned, is really treating the models as a pair-programmer or a thinking partner. Or a funny way I kind of like to think of this is, I'm sure you guys have all read or heard of the pragmatic programmer and like the rubber ducky on your desk, right? Something that you can like kind of get out of your head and talk to, even if it's inanimate. But it's kind of interesting that now we have actual things that we can talk to and to iterate, to kind of stay in flow, but to have actual feedback and insights coming from that. So this, I think the Claude Code docs do a great job of kind of concretely illustrating what this process can look like, of having a more disciplined iterative approach. So I would refer to those for, again, what's worked well for us. But that para-programming approach, you can get real production grade, I think scalable code bases out of that, because you're, of course, intentionally thinking through what's happening. You're code reviewing, you're iterating and involved with the design process, but it's still a huge multiplier of productivity, at least in our context. So again, not vibe coding. I consider that more traditional vibe coding, or traditional coding, but with the discipline of the traditional software engineering workflow. That said, though, everything I'm doing now is like almost completely different than it was 2 months ago in terms of my own process using a bunch of these tools. And then, aiding and automating solutions engineering and enterprise customizations. I think this is a pretty interesting one. I don't know, I haven't heard anybody talking about it. I'm sure people are thinking about it though. So for our use case, we almost have like a new business model that's come out over the last year, and it's a productized service at greater scale. So if you think of the amount of value that you can unlock as you push a little bit more into the agency side of operating, big enterprise clients with more traditional solutions engineering, customize almost like agency work. So I didn't mention this, but Snapbar, we're an event marketing platform, so we have a suite of AI tools that help marketers in different contexts. So for them, having customization of the microsite, for example, that they have at some large product release or whatever, is really helpful. So by pushing a little bit more into the service side, having more of what I would call traditionally a productized service, we're able to capture a lot more value for our customers and provide a lot more value. But then we're also able to heavily automate that or aid it with these code gen tools. And then sometimes what we're pushing towards is fully automating it. So you can imagine, again, making a bunch of like front-end customizations that the end customer is prompting an agent to do. Or right now what that looks like is our solutions engineer, operations folks using these code gen tools like Cursor and Windsurf in order to get that last mile. So I think these second and third order impacts, such as this business model, are pretty interesting to think through. And then this was touched on a little bit, but the strategy and marketing product research side of things. So yeah, deep research, I mean, it's using O3 under the hood. So if you can get past the deep research side of things, you've got literally the most powerful model that OpenAI has right now to help you think through coding challenges, and it shows. For us too, though, deep market research, company strategy, product strategy, feeding as much into it as we can, giving it enough context to really help us think through our ideas, whether that's product or, again, business strategy, market research, thinking through new releases, anything like that. One other tactical piece that we found was really helpful is taking transcriptions. This was just alluded to a bit from our meetings, and then feeding them into Notebook LM to use either the podcast feature, which is incredible if you guys haven't used that, or just being able to interact with it and ask specific questions. But you can take that summary and then feed that into Claude, for example, to create like a PRD.MD or like a other markup that can be helpful. All right, so again, there's no chance I'm going to finish through all these slides, so I'll show the QR code at the end here, but I've got a list of a bunch of specific workflows and tools. One thing I wanted to cover here, though, so traditional AI models that you guys are all, I'm sure, familiar with here that have been really helpful. So, of course, Claude 3.7 has been great, although it's a little ambitious for code gen and architecture. O1 Pro and O3 Mini, high for thinking through architectural approaches, and then deep research for quickly learning about a new domain, and then also helping get spun up on libraries, tools, doing strategic research, anything like that. And then, of course, the code gen tools, Cursor, Windsurf, Claude Code for development, and then Bolt and Lovable for new prototypes. And then what I found to be the most helpful MCP servers have been the, well, there's the MCP directory, and that's from the official, people behind the spec that Anthropic's been working with. So that's a great, that GitHub repo has a bunch of resources. And then browser tools basically gives context to Claude or wherever you're using your MCP cursor to your browser, like network logs, console logs, and then it can take screenshots, which is really helpful. And as was mentioned earlier too, just keeping it in context and allowing it to, like the agent, to have as much context as possible in its session is super helpful, and just allowing us to stay in flow as we're developing. And then Firecrawl for turning any website into Markdown. That way these models don't have to parse a bunch of XML or HTML and a bunch of distracting documents, but can get right to the concise context that is needed is super helpful. I've also found personally that at least with Cursor, Windsurf and Claude Code as well, I don't feel like they do a great job of indexing docs. So being able to actually pull whatever I'm working with a bunch and then shove that into a Markdown file has been really helpful. And just to give some context here, skipping over the cursor rules since that was covered pretty well, what I'll do is I'll create I think I've got this here, a context file or a folder in my repo. You don't have to, but just to keep things organized. And then I'll create a docs file and then throw any documentation that I'm working with, external like I just mentioned, using Firecrawl MCP to go out and programmatically grab stuff, or just using Firecrawl directly and then putting those Markdown files in the docs. And then also, we had maybe 80 pages of API documentation for one of our services in Google Docs. So I just saved that, or you can export it as a Markdown file, and then brought that directly into this folder as well, which can be a little heavy on the context, but it was super helpful for us. And then a couple other tools, the Google Docs piece I just mentioned, then of course Super Whisper, if you guys are familiar, shout out to Art for giving me a bunch of tool recommendations, including this one. But that's to get the true vibe coding, being able to hit a hotkey and then have a model transcribe your speech. And then it's context aware, so it knows, is it in a cursor terminal? Is it in a text message thread? Is it in an email context? So it can clean up your text or not clean up your text depending on the use case, which is just so helpful for that rapid iteration. How am I doing on time, Tyler? 5 minutes? Okay. All right, so I just wanted to cover, so I've got some strategy and helpful patterns, and then some workflow tips here. I'm just kind of giving you guys, so this is like the exact workflow I'll use, including the context that I'll generate, PRD docs, that kind of stuff, and then a bunch of educational resources here. One thing I'll touch on, I think because the space is moving so incredibly fast, I mean, it's just wild, as everybody knows. I mean, each week there's new stuff for us to dive deep into. Having good sources of knowledge and being able to really efficiently filter through the noise and find the signal is so important. So I just want to highlight these, and I'll go back to the strategy bit. Anything latent space, they're the people, Swix and a few others behind AI Engineer World's Fair, which I've found tons of value from. Their podcast, the Latent Space podcast here, and then their website, which is just latent.space, I believe, yeah, at the top there. Those are two excellent resources. They've got like a 2024, or like in a 2024 AI engineers white paper, like the must-read white papers across a bunch of different domains. They're a little bit more focused on true AI engineering, so like applied AI and ML, or using LLMs and reasoning within your apps, but super helpful for the vibe coding side of things as well. Anyway, some great, anything Carpathy, the Fast.ai for more ML resources, a bunch of great conferences, including, of course, Joe's AI Tinkerers, which is incredible, and then some great YouTube channels. I'll just highlight AI Explained really quick. He does an amazing job of covering new white papers, new advancements or like releases coming out from any of the frontier labs. Would highly recommend giving them a follow. And then, of course, the AI Engineer, the conference, they have a bunch of their YouTube videos brought over there. So here's the QR code to those, just to highlight that if you wanted. A couple pieces of strategy that I just wanted to touch on in my last couple minutes here. I think the biggest thing I've found using all this is that context really matters. So like the way I like to think about it is, I mean, if you were the model and like having empathy for the model, if you were only told what's the model has access to, so like what's in context, what's indexed in the code base, what MCPs it has access to, it could go out and grab, what's in your context folder, and like the API docs and everything. I mean, that's all it knows. And if you think about, this is a great reason to go out and learn more of the fundamentals of how these LLMs work. But if you understand their architecture, and if you understand what they were trained on, and kind of this like this fuzzy, long-term memory, if you will, to draw an analogy to us, there's only so much that they can pull from. So one, being able to really highlight things that you want it to help you with. So giving concrete examples, pulling in these precise docs, making sure that you reference the thread that you had above, so that the model really does, anchor to that part of the neural net, and be able to like fire from its most competent weights. Doing all that is so helpful. So just thinking really concretely about your context and what you're asking it to do, and being articulate and concrete in your thoughts is really important. So vibe coding, of course, is fun from like using Super Whisper and running quickly. But if you really want to get great results out of these models, and they're capable of incredible things in my experience, if you do, writing well and treating it like a true paraprogrammer or another person on the team is very critical. So that's probably the most valuable, the context is everything piece here. And then, yeah, defining your stack up front. So like what tooling, again, this was covered really well earlier, you're using is so valuable. That way you're anchoring, especially with Bolt or Lovable, you're anchoring the output to what your code base actually is. This has been helpful for us on the non-technical side, making sure that those folks are aligned with our code base. And then, of course, choosing libraries and frameworks that have a ton of training data. So anything TypeScript, React, Next.js, Node tends to have a ton of open source examples. And then a lot of these libraries are more modern tech stacks too. I feel like the training data or the quality of the apps that they're pulling from are really high end. So unfortunately, due to time, this is the last thing I'll say. What's been great is these are really good at UI design and like a bunch of like even SEO. Being able to just like quickly get a suggestion, if you will, going into your app and just asking it for ways to improve SEO. Again, same thing with design as was brought up earlier. And I think part of it is the training data plus the prompting, being able to pull from really well-established code bases and like great paradigms. So for our team, especially the non-technical team, but like for me as well, I'm starting projects out not from just my own understanding, but pulling from some of these great patterns in modern code bases, style guidelines, frameworks, and then I'm starting there versus just what I would come up with on my own. So I think by using these tools, we're able to aggregate a bunch of knowledge and really have a boost to what the end product is, because we're iterating on an 80% baseline versus a 50% baseline, if you want to think about it that way. Anyways, thanks for your time.
All right, that was exactly 20 minutes, but if you want to take like one question before we wrap up. Anyone want to ask Patrick a question?
Yeah.
When you're doing enterprise sort of customization of your application, but like letting the customer, let's say, fiddle around with the UI, are you like tenant-basing that, or are you just saying like go ahead and modify the UI any way that you want and just deal with the consequences for everybody else?
Great question. So our workflow for a lot of the customizations is actually a Git-based workflow. Actually, this might be kind of interesting to folks. So we use Netlify for to provision a lot of our front ends or host them. So we actually will just provision a branch. So all the logic is the same as our core branch, and then it's really easy for us to obviously make that change, and then just assign them a subdomain, and then that completely isolates any changes unique to that client. On the back end, it's a little bit more complicated, but most of our changes for enterprise are on the front end, and we use Node.js functions quite a bit in order to get around any sticking points that might bring up.
All right, thanks so much, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks.